Welcome back to Get the F to Sleep. Tonight, I'm delivering an hour of deeply unnecessary instruction from a wood carving manual published in 1891. Topics include tool selection, sharpening, stamping, and the soul-erasing thrill of proper indenting technique. No plot, no music, no profanity, just pure, uncut, historical boredom. You probably won't make it to the end, and that's the point. Let's begin. Skill in wood carving, as in every other art, is to be attained only by thoroughness. Let the pupil, therefore, bear in mind that he or she must be careful to master the first lessons and to go no further until these can be executed with ease and accuracy. This will be greatly aided if the book is read with care and not used for mere reference. Teachers will please observe that the work is in a regular series of progressive lessons, the first being extremely easy, and that these lessons lead so gradually to one another that the last are no harder than the first to one who has gone on carefully from the beginning. This will be found to aid teaching and self-instruction greatly. Every item of information will be found under its proper head and not scattered here and there through different chapters, for every lesson is complete in itself, and from the first pupil is taught how to produce some satisfactory work of its kind. Tools and implements. The first and most important is a strong and, if possible, a heavy table or bench. If the pupil cannot afford this, an ordinary small kitchen table must be found. It should be used for carving alone, as it will be necessary to bore holes and drive screws into it. But if a table cannot be spared for this, the pupil must make shift by putting a board at least an inch in thickness on a common table and fastening it with clamps. At a more advanced stage, he will carve standing up at a higher bench or with his work on a stand. Pupils in wood carving shops often carve standing from the beginning. Carving tools are generally divided into two classes: chisels, which are flat at the end and in the blade, and gouges, which are hollow. Among professional wood carvers, the former is generally known as a firmer in order to distinguish it from the chisel used by carpenters. A carver's chisel is always ground on both sides so as to form a wedge, like a very high, steep roof, while that of the carpenter is a stouter implement, its edge being like a wedge which is flat on one side, but it is only ground on the other. The object of grinding carvers' chisels on both sides is that there are many cuts which cannot be executed by a carpenter's chisel at all, or at least not with ease, for one would be obliged, while using it, to continually turn it around. Carvers, chisels, or firmers are of many and all sizes, from an inch in breadth down to the pick, which, across the end or edge, is no wider than a small hyphen. To these may be added the skew chisels, also called skews, or corner firmers, which are firmers ground off diagonally so that the point is on one side. These are also sharpened on both sides. These, of all widths, vary from the extra flat, which is so slightly curved that it might, at a casual glance, be taken for an ordinary chisel, to the ordinary flat. A little more bend or convexity gives the scroll gouge. A semicircle or any narrower portion of the same curve is a hollow gouge, the smaller sizes of which are called veiners, the very smallest of the latter being known as eye tools. There are some differences of names for these among writers as well as workmen, but for all practical purposes, the terms here used may be accepted and may be understood by all who sell the tools. Bent tools. Both chisels and gouges are made straight or bent or curved in the shank. It often happens that in deep cutting or in hollowed spaces, it is impossible to cut with an implement having a straight shaft, while with one differently shaped, the wood can be easily removed. Holdfasts. Carver screws and clamps, hand screws, bench screws, etc. As the carver holds his tools with one hand and directs it with the other, it is evident that some means must be taken to secure in place the piece of work which he cuts. The simplest method of doing this is to drive 3 or 4 nails or screws into the table at a convenient distance. The work may be held between these to prevent its slipping. Holdfasts, clamps, or cramps. These cramps are small iron frames, like 3 sides of a square, with a screw in the under limb. They are used on the edge of the table to hold the work firmly down to its surface. 2 or more are always employed. Their fault is that they indent and damage the work. A piece of waste wood may be interposed between the work and the upper limb to prevent this, but such a guard is generally in the way and otherwise objectionable. Hand screws are far better tool, entirely free from the above named objection. They consist of 2 strips of hardwood rounded at the one end, or jaws, and 2 screws, also of wood, one of which passes through both jaws, and the other through only one, the end of the second screw entering a recess made in the other jaw to retain it in position. To use them, the handles are grasped firmly in the 2 hands, and the hands are revolved around one another away from you, which causes the jaws to open exactly parallel with one another. When the opening between the jaws equals the thickness of the work, and the table. The hand screws are slipped over them, and the second screw then alone receives an extra half turn. This throws the jaws slightly out of parallelism and effects a powerful grip upon the work at their points. They are exceedingly powerful also in holding work for gluing together and other purposes, and are made for all sizes. Carver's screws. These are iron screws about 12 or 14 inches long with a finer pointed screw, like that of a gimlet, at the one end and a square at the other. On the screw is a winged or fly nut. To use them, the point is screwed firmly into the underside of the work, with the fly nut removed and used as a lever by one of the holes in its wings placed on the square on the end of the shaft. The shaft is then passed through a hole made through the top of the bench or table, and the fly nut replaced on the screw below the table to fix the work down to it. The screws are long, which is sometimes convenient, but if the work be thin, it is usual to put a block of waste wood on the shaft before the fly nut to avoid the tedium of having to screw the latter up a long way. Slackening the nut enables the work to be turned around to any required position, and there is nothing above the table except the work. Snibs or dogs. These are pieces of wood screwed down to the table, which hold the panel or other piece of work by a projection. They are easily made by simply sawing out a piece of wood fairly corresponding in thickness to the panel. Take an ordinary button, such as is common on cupboards in country cottages to fasten the door. Saw out a piece of the panel 1 or more inches square. Put the screw through the button and turn it over the panel and the little waste piece of wood. 2 or more of these will hold the work perfectly fast. The simplest method of all is to leave about an inch at either end of the panel and pass screws through these extra portions into the table. When the work is carved, these ends may be sawn off. The scratch. This is a very convenient and ingenious tool. It is used for running small moldings and hollows where the lines are long and straight. It makes finer work than is possible by means of gouges. The cutters are made from pieces of steel barely 1/16 of an inch thick. Broken pieces of saws are generally used for cutters. They must be tightly fixed in the stock. It is worked backwards and forwards gently. When the cutters are filed to the required shape, they have to be finished with a slipstone to take out the file marks. They are sharpened straight across the edges. The router. This is a small copy of the joiner's plane of the same name. It consists of a block of wood with a perfectly flat sole. A hole through it at an angle carries the cutter and the wedge by which it is fixed. It is employed for flattening the groundwork after that has been partially excavated with the chisels. The sole of the router rests upon any margins left of the original surface and being worked about over the ground. The fixed projection of the cutter rapidly reduces the latter to one true level. These routers are made from about 9 inches long in the sole to about 3 inches, the smallest, which little tools have cutters about 1/8 of an inch wide. Saws. There are various kinds. Perhaps the most useful is the fret bow saw. This consists of a light, thin steel frame with screw jaws at the open end in which the thin saw blades are clamped. The handle is also formed as a screw by which its jaw can be advanced about an inch towards its fellow. To place the saw in position for work, the end of the handle is screwed around until its jaw has advanced about an inch. The saw is then fixed in the opposite jaw by its thumb screw, then in the handle jaw in the same way, after which the handle is turned until its jaw has traveled back again the distance it had previously advanced, thus straining the saw by the tension of the steel spring saw frame. This saw is very useful for removing superfluous pieces from the outer line, both in flat works and when carving in the round, as will be explained. Its primary purpose is for cutting out pierced and bowl and fretwork, but for such work as the apertures cut do not always cut out to the edges. A drill is required to pierce holes to thread the saw through the work before it is placed in the second jaw to strain it. In addition to the tools already described, the pupil will need for more and varied work the following: the spade chisel and spade gouge. These are very light and are used for finishing by hands, as, for instance, in cutting around grapes or plums or in fine work. Knuckle bends are gouges scooped or bent in a curve like a knuckle. The macaroni tool. This is like 3 sides of a square. It is for removing wood on each side of a vein or leaf or similar delicate work. It is not very commonly used. The parting tool or V, straight or curved. This is a useful tool for outlining a pattern or veining leaves. Beginners find it, like the macaroni, rather difficult to sharpen or to keep an edge on it. It must not be used recklessly for carving, as it is apt to break unless handled with care. It should be kept with a cork on the end. It is a question among experts as to whether the tools for beginners should have long or short handles, which is as sensible as if they should debate whether the pupils should have larger or smaller hands. General Seton, who is in other matters a good authority, declares that small, short, neatly turned boxwood handles must be avoided. They are nearly useless. Get good-sized beech or ash handles, quite 5 inches long, and if the steel is a 4 or 4.5 inches long, you will have a really serviceable tool. Common sense teaches that between a child or a young lady who has a palm the size of a cardinal seal, to borrow a simile from Benvenuto Cellini, and a workman who would burst a number 10 glove, there must be very great differences in the size of handles, and it is certain that for young beginners, short ones are to be advised. If they are not to be obtained ready-made, then take an extraordinary long handle, saw it off to the requisite length, say from 3 to 3½ inches, round the sharp edge of the wood, firstly with a knife or a chisel, and then with a rasp, and finish it off with glass paper. See that the tools, when set in the handles, are well ringed and firm. In most shops, it is usual to sharpen them if it be required. After becoming accustomed to such handles, the pupil may, as he progresses, familiarize himself with those which are in general use. There really is only one trouble in wood carving. This is the sharpening the tools and keeping them in good condition. For this is the grindstone and oilstone are indispensable, and the beginner must take pains to learn to sharpen his tools well and readily. Sharpening. Tools which are as yet unground or which have had the edge broken may, with patience and care, be sharpened on a harsh, flat stone, but round grindstones which revolve with a handle are not dear. You can, however, always get your tools ground by any carpenter. Every carver should therefore, if possible, own one of these grindstones. It will serve as well for a large class as for an individual. The next indispensable is the oilstone. This is to be found of different kinds. The ordinary turkey stone, set in a block of wood, will answer for firmers, skews, and flat gouges. For finer tools, the best Arkansas stones may be employed. Before using one, let fall on it a few drops of oil, which is to be kept in a small can with a narrow spout made expressly for such dropping. Have a coarse rag, and when you have done with the stone, always wipe it clean of the oil. Take great care not to wear a hollow in the middle of the stone. It is by far the best plan to get some wood carver or carpenter to show you how to sharpen the tools. There are very few places where there is not somebody who can teach this art. It is usual to have a box cover to the oilstone, which should always be over it when not in use, to prevent dust from settling on the surface. Very little dust indeed combined with the oil is a great hindrance to sharpening. Slips. These are pieces of Arkansas, turkey, and other stones made of a variety of shapes to fit the inside of such tools as cannot be sharpened on a flat surface like that of an oilstone. They require great care in handling lest the fingers be cut. To avoid this, take a piece of wood and cut a deep groove in it, exactly adapted to hold the stone firmly, leaving as much of it projecting as may be required for use. If you cannot obtain a slip exactly suited to any particular tool, then grind or cut it to shape on the grindstone or with a file. Some carvers use a very coarse whetstone adapted to this purpose. The safe method using a slip when not mounted in wood is to lay the back of the gouge at 1.5 inches from the edge, on the edge of the table. The edge of the tool must be slightly raised, and the slip can then be applied with perfect safety and with great effect. The V, or parting tool, is difficult to sharpen because until one has had practice with it, it is hard to cut down each side in exact uniformity with the other. For this, it is necessary to have a slip ground to a V edge so as to exactly fit the inside of the tool. The strap. This is a piece of hard, smooth leather glued on a bit of board. This may be prepared with sweet oil and emery powder or tripoli to be renewed as on occasion as required, or with a preparation of lard and crocus powder. Emery paste sold at the tool shop will answer for all ordinary work. When no strap is at hand, a final sharp or razor edge may be given even on a smooth pine board, especially if a very little fine air dust might be on it. Sharpening the tools is like threading the needle in sewing or putting a point on lead pencils when drawing, something which is a great trouble and a constant interruption to earnest work, yet which must be constantly seen to. Never go on carving for a second if you find that a tool is growing in the least dull or scratchy. There can be no good work whatever without really good tools in perfect order. It may be observed that tools are never ground quite so much inside as they are externally. Also, that this double grinding gives a sharper cutting edge, but gouges require very little edging inside. Should the carver be unable to obtain a Turkey or Arkansas stone, he may use smooth slate or almost any stone which is tolerably hard. Wood. All wood for carving should be of the best quality, well seasoned, and free as possible from cracks, knots, or other irregularities. Fine white pine or deal, being very easy to cut, is suitable for a beginner. Lime and pear tree wood, like pine, are even in the grain. American walnut is also easy to cut. It is of a beautiful dark color, which is much improved by oiling and age. With this, but tougher than the preceding, are beech, elm, and oak. Poplar, yellow deal, and the so-called American wood known as poplar in America, Middle States, are useful for many kinds of work. The carver should accustom himself as soon as possible to oak, as a hard wood is by no means hard to carve as soon as a little skill is acquired. Bone, ivory, and pearl shell, which at the first effort seems to be almost impenetrable, after a few days are worked with great ease. First lesson: Indenting and stamping. The first stage in wood carving is to decorate a flat surface in very low relief by a process which, strictly speaking, is not carving at all. Let the beginner take a panel or thin flat board, let us say one of 6 inches in breadth, 12 in length, and half an inch or less in thickness. For this kind of work, a finely grained, even, and light-colored wood, such as holly or beech, is preferable. Draw the pattern on paper of the size intended with a very black and soft lead or crayon pencil. Place it with the face to the wood and turning the edges over. Gum them down to the edge of the panel. Then, with some very smooth, hard object, such as an agate or steel burnisher, an ivory paper knife, or the end of a rounded and glossy penknife handle, carefully rub the back of the pattern. When this is done, remove the paper and the pattern will be found transferred to the wood. If imperfect, touch it up. The pupil may now, with a pattern wheel or tracer, indent or mark a line or narrow groove in the outline of the pattern. The tracer is the same implement of the same name, which is used in repoussel or brass sheet or metal work. Its end is exactly like that of a screwdriver. To manage it properly, hold it upright and run it along, tapping it as it goes with a hammer of iron or wood. In some countries, a stick of wood about 6 inches in length and an inch broad at the butt is used. Where the wheel cannot be employed, as in small corners, use the tracer. The pointed tracer, used in leatherwork and in carpentry, is often indispensable for the smaller pattern work. When the outline is all marked out in a groove, take one of the stamps or grounding punches and with the hammer indent the whole background. If there be corners too small to admit the stamp or stamps for the same pattern, then finish them up with a pointed nail or any point, such as a bodkin. The result will be like the simple design in Figure 23. When this is done, coat the whole thing with oil. Rub it in and wipe it off with care. Then, with a piece of very soft wood, polish only the pattern. And finally, rub it off by hand or with a stiff brush. This kind of ornamentation is adapted to the covers of books or albums as it can be applied to the thinnest sheets of wood. Another way to improve this work is to take the tracer and smooth down and depress the ground, especially near the pattern edge. This gives an improved relief. Then the ground may be stamped or matted. It may be borne in mind that the pupil who masters this process of indenting with wheel, tracers, and stamps will be quite able to work patterns in damp sheet leather, since the latter is effected in the same way with the same tools. Nor does the first step in the repousse or sheet brass work differ greatly from it. All the minor arts have a great deal in common. Many of the tools used in one of being applicable to others. The pupil who begins with some knowledge of drawing will soon find it easy to work in any material. The pupil, having done this, has an idea of how pattern is placed or spaced and contrasted with the ground. He may now take another panel and, having drawn the pattern, Cut out the outline in a light groove with a very small gouge or a V tool, or firmer. Let him be very careful to hold the handle in his right hand and guide the blade with the fingers of the left, and never let the latter get before the point. Do not cut deeply or too rapidly. Before beginning on the pattern, practice cutting grooves on waste wood. Unless this is done, the panel will almost certainly be spoiled. It is usual among carvers to begin cutting with the groove with a V tool, but it is well to prepare for this by using the tracer or wheel. Figure 27 represents the effect of a ground which is indented and to a degree ornamented by using round stamps of different patterns and sizes. Very good effects may be produced in this way, which resembles diaper work. To clearly recapitulate the process, let me observe. About to begin, the pupil must have a smooth panel without knots or imperfections. The pattern is drawn on this or transferred to it. The pattern should be entirely in outline without any inside lines or drawing between the outside edges. Take a wheel or tracer and indent the whole pattern very carefully and rather deeply. Not all at one pressure, but by going twice or thrice over the line. Then, with a stamp and hammer, indent all the background and spaces between the edges of the pattern. Having done this once, take another panel and pattern, and instead of pressing in the outline with a wheel or tracer, cut it with a parting tool or gouge, not too deeply. Then indent as before, shown in figure 25. The stamping, the grounds, is often miscalled diaper carving, but the diaper is, correctly speaking, a small pattern multiplied to make a ground and not roughly corrugating or dotting with a bodkin or pricking. This latter is, of course, indenting. Diapers may be either stamped or carved like any other patterns. This process of flattening, wheeling, tracing, and stamping wood, though little practiced now, was so common in the Middle Ages that there are very few galleries containing pictures with gold backgrounds in which there are not specimens of it. Very great masters in painting frequently practiced it. After gilding the ground, they outlined the pattern with a prick wheel, which is quite like the rowel of a spur, and often traced dotted patterns with the wheel itself on the flat gold. Black or dark brown paint was then rubbed into the dots. Sometimes the stamp was also used, and its marks or holes filled in the same manner. It is not necessary to gild the background to produce a fine effect. First, apply a coat of varnish. Polish it when dry with the finest glass paper. Then apply a coat or two of white oil paint, toned with Naples yellow, and when it is dry, work it with wheel, tracers, and stamps. When dry, polish it again and rub dark brown paint into all the lines and dots. Cover it with 2 coats of fine retouching varnish, and the effect will be that of old stamped ivory. This first lesson may be omitted by those who wish to proceed at once to carving. It is given here because it sets forth the easiest and least expensive manner of ornamenting wood, and one which forms a curious and beautiful art by itself. With it, one can acquire a familiarity with the method of transferring patterns to wood and with the management of the tracer and stamp. The pattern wheel should be held in the right hand and guided by the forefinger of the left, which is a good preparatory practice for the chisel and gouge. While the tools requisite for this work are few and inexpensive, it may be observed that tolerable substitutes may be obtained for them anywhere. Almost any knife blade, eraser, or screwdriver can be ground into a dull edge, which may serve to trace and press the wood, while a spike or very large nail can, with a file, be so crossed at the end to make a stamp. Second lesson, cutting grooves with a gouge. We will now suppose that the pupil has a piece of smooth pine wood, at least 6 inches by 6 in size and half an inch in thickness, fastened to the table before him. Let him draw on it 2 lines with a lead pencil across the grain, 1/4 of an inch distant from each other. Then, taking a fluter or gouge of semicircular curve, also 1/4 of an inch in diameter, let him carefully cut away the wood between the lines so as to form a semicircular groove. This is not to be effected by cutting all the wood away at once. A very little should be removed at first so as to make a shallow groove. Then this may be cut over again till the incision is perfect. Hold the handle of the tool firmly in the right hand, with the wrist and part of the forearm resting on the bench. Place 2 first fingers of the left hand on the face of the blade about an inch from the cutting edge to direct and act as a stop to prevent the tool advancing too fast. Some place the thumb below the blade so that it is held between the thumb and the 2 first fingers. Gouge work. Keep your mind on your work. A careless movement may cause a slip of the tool and ruin it. Let every stroke of chisel or gouge be made and regulated by purpose and design, not haphazard or at random. Think exactly what you wish to cut or mean to do, and leave nothing to involuntary action. The habit of doing this may be acquired in the first few lessons, if you try, and when it is acquired, all the real difficulty of carving is mastered. Never attempt to carve anything unless it is fastened to the table. Pupils who do this fall into the habit of holding the panel down with the left hand, and the result is that the tool slips sooner or later and inflicts a wound which may be serious. Always keep both hands on the tool. When the pupil shall have cut perhaps 20 straight grooves with great care with the gouge, he may then cut cross-barred grooves and then curved ones. 2 sections of a circle thus intersecting form, as may be seen, a leaf. 1, 2, or even 3 lessons may be devoted to this, but let the pupil go no further until he can cut these grooves perfectly. He will then find it excellent practice at odd intervals to carve grooves in circles, spirals, and other forms. Groove carving may be regarded as line drawing, for any pattern which can be drawn in simple lines can be, of course, imitated with a gouge. Very pretty decorative work may be effected by this gouge grooving alone, and in fact, it was very common in the 15th and 16th centuries, as is shown by specimens in the museums. These museums are located in South Kensington, Munich, Vienna, and Salzburg. The wood chosen was generally a high-grained or strongly marked pine, the natural yellow color of which was somewhat heightened by staining, oiling, or age. The pattern, generally a leafy one, was then outlined with a narrow, say 1/3 inch gouge, and the grooves painted in with black or brown. This was applied in many ways, but especially to large cabinets or wardrobes. It is a very rapid and effective kind of work. Celtic or Irish or runic patterns, which resemble ropes or ribbons crossing one another, can be very well imitated by running these lines with a gouge. No writer on wood carving ever seems to have noticed what beautiful, complicated, and valuable work can be executed in this manner alone. These lines can be painted in black, dark colors, or red so as to make fine effects in decorative furniture. It may also be observed that when cut, they may be used for molds for plaster of Paris, paper mache, and leather. The pupil would do well to pass a few days in developing simple groove work, which is worth perfectly understanding. There are few who cannot, with care, learn to cut grooves very well with a gouge after a few days of practice. I urge that the pupil shall do this with ease before going further. Secondly, that he shall actually realize what a great amount of beautiful work can be made with one gouge from 1/4 to 1/3 of an inch diameter, as for instance in inscriptions, interlacing bands, or any kind of design formed of lines or cords, Celtic decorations, interlacing ropes or ribbons, etc. The artist who proposes to master carving for general decoration should pay particular attention to this simple work. Beginners in carving are, without exception, so anxious to get ornaments or leaves in relief and to produce some kind of high-class artwork that they pass over grooving and curve carving or flat cutting as of very little consequence, when in fact it should be in every way much to their advantage to develop it to the utmost. The great reason why there is at present so little decoration of broad spaces and panels, scrolls, or furniture by means of carving is because all carvers are devoted almost exclusively to more ambitious work and ignore what may be done with a few tools by the simplest methods. Third lesson: flat patterns made with cuts and lines. There is an easy kind of flat or hollow carving, if it can also be so called, which is executed with a gouge or V tool or a firmer alone. but which produces flat patterns. Make the design, and as it is to be executed almost entirely with lines or grooves or small hollows, it must be so designed that the patterns are close-fitting or separated only by lines. Now and then, or here and there, a small corner or large space or cavity may be removed by a touch of the tool, but as a rule, there is little work in it beyond mere lines. However, as in the gouge work of the previous lesson, although anybody can learn in a day or two the lines, yet if good patterns be available, remarkably beautiful and valuable work may be produced by it. It is as applicable to cabinets, chests, panels for chairs, or other kinds of decoration. Of course, the lines or hollows or excavations may, as in all cases, be filled in with color. This work can often be very well executed with the firmer or flat carver's chisel alone, and it will afford good practice to acquire familiarity with that greatly neglected tool. Flat or cavo cutting of this kind of work is only a little advance on grooving with a gouge, but its results may be very much more artistic. It occupies a position between gouge grooving and cutting out the ground. Each of these are separated as so many distinctive arts, but they lead to one another. The easiest way to prepare this work is to execute the pattern on the wood in Indian ink. Then simply cut away all of the black. The lines and leaves, etc., must be very carefully run with the V tool. All the larger hollows should be cut with a gouge. If very large hollows or spaces or grounds are left, they must be executed as described in the next lesson. Observe in figures 31 to 35 that all the carving is confined to simply cutting away the parts indicated by the black ground. The fine lines can be best executed with a parting or V tool, and in many instances with the same smallest gouge or veiner. Though not usual, it is excellent practice when possible to learn to do this with a small firmer or carver's chisel. These cut out flat patterns are as easy of execution as gouge work to anyone who has learned the latter. They are not now much studied, but they are capable of a wide application in decorative art. The lines and cavities look best when painted or dyed. It is the next step beyond gouge work, which represents simple drawing of lines in design and corresponds to sketching. Contour or rounding and modeling, of course, correspond to light and shade, but plain gouge and cavo cutting is simple sketching. Any animal or human figure, a vase, flowers, or vines may thus be carved, the only further condition being that the outlines shall always be broad and bold. Great care should be exercised not to make too many lines, especially fine ones, and in all cases to avoid detail and make the design as simple as you can. When in thus outlining an animal as you have clearly indicated, with as few lines as possible, what it is meant to be, you have done enough. As in all sketching, the golden rule is to give as much representation with as little work as possible. It may be observed that familiar and extensive practice of the very easy gouge groove work and of simple flat or cavo cutting in hollows, if carried out on a large scale, as if, for instance, in wall and door patterns, gives the pupil far more energy and confidence and is more conducive to freehand carving and the sweep cut than the usual method of devoting much time in the beginning to chipping elaborate leaves and other small work. Therefore, it will be well for the pupil to perfect himself in such simple groove and hollow work. This was the first step in medieval carving, and it was the proper one for general decoration. It was in this manner that the old carvers of England and their masters, the Flemings, taught their pupils. Fourth lesson, cutting out a flat panel with a ground. Let the pupil take a panel and draw it on a pattern. He is to cut this out in what is called flat carving and sometimes ribbon work. He begins by outlining, which may be effected in different ways. By taking a small fluter or veiner or a tooling gouge, 1/10 of an inch in diameter, and cutting a groove all around the pattern, just outside of it, but accurately close to it. If perfect in lesson 2, this will be very easy for him. He may do this also with a V or parting tool, but the gouge is better for a first attempt. The outline cutting may be effected by taking a firmer or carver's chisel, 1/3 of an inch broad, and taking it up and down close to the pattern, but sloping outward, giving it a tap, the mallet, so as to sink it in a very little way into the wood. Do not cut straight up and down, but so as to make a sloping bank. There is yet another way which is more difficult and seldom practiced, yet which, if mastered, gives you great skill in carving. Take the firmer or flat chisel, and holding it with great care, run it along the edge, sloping outwards, so as to cut the line accurately. By means of this method, the whole work may be very well outlined. It is not urged as absolutely necessary at a first lesson, but it is advisable to practice it sooner or later. When the outlining is done, let the pupil take a flat gouge, if he has cut the line with a small gouge, and very carefully shave away the wood from the ground. Let him cut at first very little at a time, but for his object is now not to make something to show, but to learn how to manage his tools. Do not finish all the cutting in one part at once, leaving the rest untouched, but go all over it gradually several times until it is nearly perfect. Let every touch tell. Remove the wood at every cut and leave no edges or splinters. To do this well, you must also always watch and consider the grain of the wood at the particular spot you are operating upon. It is easy enough to see whether you are cutting with that is in the same direction as the grain or across the grain, but it is something beyond this that has to be looked to. It is invariable that all wood, whether cut with the grain or partially across the grain, will be found to work better, smoother, and with less tendency to splinter, either in the one or the other direction. That is to say, when cut from right to left, or the reverse from left to right. The required direction in which it will cut the smoothest is at once shown by the behavior of the wood itself and the quality of the results. Hence, should be work or surface show a tendency to splinter, if possible, cut it from the opposite direction and turn the work round on the bench, should that be necessary to enable you to do it. That is, if you cannot use the tool in either hand. Be aware, above all things, of letting the hands work mechanically. Think of what you are about. By learning to cut clean and flat, you are taking the first step towards the sweep cut, which will come afterwards, and which requires both deliberation and dexterity. When all is cut out nicely and carefully, take an extra flat gouge and clean the floor, removing every trace of unevenness. Then take a French round nail or bodkin, and with the mallet, fill the ground with little holes as to make a rough surface. Or you may use one of the stamps for this. This requires care so that the shape of the stamp may not be apparent. It is advisable to trim with a very sharp, small chisel and with great care the edge of the pattern. For this lesson, it will be the best not to cut away more than 1/4 of an inch to form the ground. If the outlining is done with a chisel and mallet, before cutting away the ground, go over the outline and cut it a little distance from the line already cut towards it, so as to remove the wood and form a V-shaped groove as one digs with a spade. Teachers or pupils are begged to remember that the sole object of this lesson is to learn how to handle and manage the tools, that is, to become familiar with them, and how to learn to cut a ground with skill and confidence. To do this, there should be much occasional practice on bits of waste wood. Therefore, it is earnestly urged that no beginner shall go further than the work described in this lesson until he or she can execute it with accuracy and ease. When this is gained, all that remains to be done is easy. The reason why the V tool is not specially recommended to beginners for outlining is that for the most difficult of all tools in ordinary use to sharpen, the small gouge answers every purpose for the work in hand. To recapitulate first, we have the cutting away from between the outlines of the pattern. If the panel be 1/2 inch in thickness, it should not be more than 1/4 inch in depth. Cut over the hole very lightly at first, and then go over it again and again. Do not dig or cut out the whole 1/4 inch in one place at once, leaving the rest as yet untouched. Should you do this, you will be led to cutting too deeply in some places. When the hard work is effectively executed and nearly all the wood is roughly cut away, the work is said to be bested or sketched. a word supposed to be derived from the French or the Italian, meaning the same thing. After cutting, the pupil may proceed, which is simply an amplification of the same. This concludes our reading on wood carving. You made it through, or you fell asleep mid-stroke. Either way, mission accomplished. Good night.